Hi, my name is Medhat Al-Masri. This video demonstrates how you can create your own MCP server using .NET. We will then consume the MCP server also with .NET. To follow along, you need to have Docker Desktop installed on your computer. You need a GitHub account. You also need Visual Studio Code and .NET 9.0. Also, you should install the GitHub Copilot chat extension into your Visual Studio Code. So let's get started. In a working directory, I shall create a folder named MCP Students. The theme of our MCP server would be retrieving student data from an endpoint. So I created that folder. Let me go into that folder. In this folder, I will create a simple console application in .NET. So the command for that is .NET new console, and the name will be Student MCP Server. Now I can open up my solution in VS Code. I do have an extension called the C# Dev Kit, which is this one here. I will go into Solution Explorer in VS Code. So you will notice that there is one solution and it's got a project called Students MCP Server. We need some packages in order to turn this console application into a .NET MCP server. I need the Model Context Protocol, which is currently in pre-release, and I need Microsoft Extensions Hosting and System Text JSON. So I will copy these and run them in a terminal window inside of the Students MCP Server folder. So I'm going to go into that folder and install these packages in that folder. Next, I need you to visit this GitHub site, github.com/modelcontextprotocol/C# SDK. And here it is. Scroll down to the section that says Get Started Server. Copy this code down here. So I'll click on the copy tool over here and go into my Program.cs, delete everything that's in there, and paste this code. Let's look at the code. So in Program.cs, here we're creating our application builder. We're adding logging, and here is where we're adding MCP server to the services using this transport and with tools from assembly, and then we run the app. What's important is to look at this section here. We have a static class called Echo Tool, and this is basically the service that's being created for this MCP server. It receives a message and then it just echoes it back out again. So this is pretty much the Hello World MCP server. We will consume this MCP server in Visual Studio Code. Click on View Command Palette and choose MCP Add Server. This happens to be at the top because it's the last thing I did. So I'm going to click on that and then choose the first option, which is Command stdio. I'm going to choose that one. For the command, just type in .NET run and hit enter. For the server ID, I'm just going to call it Student MCP Server and hit enter. The next thing it asks you is, do you want this to be global to your Visual Studio or just local to this particular application? So I'm going to choose Workspace, which makes it local. And you get this dialog, and I'm just going to click on Trust. So it creates for you this file, mcp.json, and that file happens to be under a folder called VS Code. We will need to further configure this JSON file. Right-click on your CS proj file in this view at the very top. I right-click on my CS proj file and choose Copy Path. Then back in my mcp.json file, I will make some minor adjustments. I will add -- project here. And finally, I'm going to paste my absolute path. And here it is. We have a small error here, and that's because I did not put a comma. And notice that up here it says error, but I have an option to restart, so I'm going to click on restart. And when I do that, the server is actually running and we can start using it. Let's open the GitHub Copilot chat panel by clicking on this thing up here. Make sure that you select agent mode here. For the model, you can use GPT 4.1 or any of these Claude models. I'll just stick with GPT 4.1. I'm gonna use this message in the chat window using the MCP echo tool, echo message, hello beautiful world. So let's take this one and paste it in the chat and see what happens. So now it detects that there is indeed an MCP server that knows how to handle this request. It's trying to send that message to the MCP server. It asks me to click on allow. If I click on allow, it echoed the message, hello beautiful world. Now, where are our MCP servers? You can click on this configure tool, which is the tool here in the bottom right hand corner. Here are the MCP servers, and you can see our MCP server, which is Student MCP Server, is enabled here and it's using it. You can click on OK to close this pop-up. Let's do something that is more interesting and more real. I want you to visit this API endpoint, and we will try to consume the data at this endpoint in an MCP server. Of course, you can do much more than that. Just appreciate the possibilities of what can be done with an MCP server. You can see that there is some data at that endpoint, and this data has to do with students, and you have your student ID here, a first name for the student, a last name for the student, and the school that that student belongs to. Let us consume this, and then let us have an MCP server respond to questions like how many students are there, how many students have last name Ray, for example, how many students belong to the School of Nursing, and so on and so forth. I will need to create a student class. Back in my students MCP server project, I will create a new folder called models. And in that models folder, I will create a C# class named student. And the code for the student class is simply going to be this. I've got 4 properties: student ID of type int, and then first name, last name, school of type optional string. And down here, I simply have a toString method that looks like this. I will add another class into the models folder, and this class will be called student context. And the code for the student context is this. Let me resolve the namespaces. And this is simply the system.text.json.serialization. Now, what is the purpose of the student context class? It is used for serialization and deserialization of JSON objects. Next, let us add a class also in the models folder, and this class we'll call it StudentService. And the purpose of the student service is to read the API. The code for this student service is in a GitHub gist, and you can go and visit this GitHub gist. The link will be in the bottom of this video. It should take you to the following site. Click on row and copy the whole thing and come and paste it right here. Let's have a look at the methods in this class. You will notice that it's using caching to read the data and cache it for 10 minutes. This is so that you don't need to read the data again and again if you're working with it in a span of 10 minutes. The first method is fetch students from API, and it reads all the students and puts them in a list of student objects. This is another method that gets the students, and this method actually calls the first method to get the students. The third method is to get students by full name, another one to get the students by ID, and then get students by school, get students by last name, get students by first name, and get students in JSON format. So there is one line here that has an error and we need to resolve a namespace system.net.http.json. Let's go back and have a peek at Program.cs, and you will notice this class here, which we looked at before. This basically exposes these methods as being MCP methods. So we need to do something similar for our student. Visit this gist site on GitHub. You will find the code for student tools. We will create that class in the models folder. So I'll add a C# class file and I'll call it student tools. And I'll take the code from here, click on row, and just copy the whole thing and paste it here. Let's resolve these namespaces. The first one requires model context protocol.server, and the second one requires system component model. Looking at this, we have the student tools class that is annotated as an MCP server tool type. In this class, we are instantiating an instance of the student service, which we call _student service. And then you have methods here that mirror the respective methods in the student service class. The first one is getStudentsJSON, and it simply calls the getStudentsJSON method in the student service class, and it returns a string. Similarly, you have methods for getStudentJSON, getStudentsByID.json, getStudentsBySchool, getStudentsByLastName, getStudentsByFirstName, getStudentCount. Each one of these methods is annotated with MCP Server tool, and it has a good description that is of use to the AI model. And also each method has a suitable description, also intended for the AI model. At this stage, we are pretty much done enhancing our .NET MCP server so that it interacts with our students' API. Let's get back to this mcp.json file and let's restart the MCP server. So now that it has restarted, let's go and look at the tools in the chat window. So I'm going to click on tools, and now if we go back to our student MCP server, you will notice that we have more methods here, and many of these methods have to do with interaction with the student API. Let's close this and start using this MCP server for students. I will give the following prompt. Get me a list of students and display them in a table for easy reading. Let me copy this and add it here. See what it does. So it detects that there is a method called getStudentsJSON. I'll click on allow, and here it is. It's gone off and got that information from the API, and it displayed it. So now my MCP server is a go-between Visual Studio Code and my data. It's an agent. Before I consume this MCP server from a .NET C# application, I want to deploy it to Docker Hub. And to do that, I will add some instructions into the CS_proj file of this student's MCP server application. This is what I'm going to add to the CS_proj file. Enable SDK container support, set that to true. The container repository would be your username. In my case, the username is MELMASRY. You can give the image a name. I will call it by my username /studentmcp. The container family name, which is the base container family name, is Alpine, and the runtime identifier is Linux x64 and Linux ARM64. I'm going to copy this and go into my CS_proj file by clicking on the project level and just adding this stuff here. Before I can deploy this to Docker Hub, I need to log in into Docker Hub. I will change into the student MCP server folder, and in here I will log in to my Docker account. So I'm going to type in Docker, login, and my username, in my case it is MELMASRY. When I do that, in my case, because I've enabled two-factor authentication, I will be asked to log in a different way by adding my token. So I need to get hold of my Docker Hub token and paste it in here. You can see it says login successful. At this stage, let me start my Docker desktop application. So I'll click on Docker Hub here and search for my username and click on search. I do have already an image by this name, Student MCP. To avoid a conflict with the image that already exists on Docker Hub, I will rename Student MCP to Students MCP. So I have a different name for the image. So remember, I called it Students MCP. We need to publish our image to Docker Hub. To do that, I will execute this command, .NET publish. The target is publish container. I will use the container registry at docker.io. So I'm going to copy this and run it in here. And you can see at this point it is publishing my image to Docker Hub. And here it is, it's done. Now that our image is on Docker Hub, let us modify our mcp.json file so that it uses the image on Docker Hub instead of going against simply the project itself on the local machine. To do that, I will replace the JSON inside of my mcp.json file so that it uses the Docker command and runs this particular image. So I have to replace your Docker username with my username. And if you remember, I called the new image students. So I'll make that plural, copy this, and come over here and replace this whole thing with this new command. It's going to use Docker. So let me start this. So it's asking me to allow Visual Studio to access data from other apps. In this case, it's trying to talk to Docker Desktop. I'm going to allow that. It seems to be running. Let's have a peek at my Docker Desktop. And you will notice here that there is a new container that's running. In this case, it's called Elegant Channel, and it's based on my ML Mastery Students MCP image that was obtained from Docker Hub. Let us ask a question here in the GitHub Copilot chat. This time, I'm going to ask, list students in the School of Nursing. Again, it asks me to allow, and here they are. These are the students in the School of Nursing. What have we done so far? We have created an MCP server that ran locally. Then we deployed that MCP server to Docker Hub. The final step is to consume this MCP server from a command line application. In Visual Studio Code, I'm going to go to the level of the solution and add a new project. I'll add a simple console application. The name of my application is going to be GitHub Models MCP Client. And I'm going to add it to the default directory. We have now a new project, and it's simply a command line application. I need some packages to get this to work. And the packages I need are these ones. We've got 6 of them. So I'm going to copy this and go into a terminal window into the client. So it is going back one level and then going into this GitHub Models MCP client folder and install all these packages. Now my client has to use one of these generative AI models. The one I have chosen is GPT-4o Mini. In order to make it easy and cheap for you to use one of these models, I have chosen to use the GPT-4o Mini hosted on GitHub Models because for anybody who has a GitHub account, it is free. So for that, you need to have a GitHub token from GitHub. We will place the GitHub token in an app-settings.json file. So I'm going to add a custom file here and I'll call it app-settings.json. And in there, we will add this very simple JSON. There is GitHub token and the model name. The model name is fixed as GPT-4o Mini, but you need to replace this with your GitHub token. I just put my GitHub token right here. The content of my Program.cs will come from another gist with this address. I will visit that gist site and grab this code, and I'll put it instead of this hello world code in Program.cs. This is the client code that we will use to consume the MCP server. If you look at the code here, this sets up the configuration builder for reading app settings.json. Here we read the values in the app settings.json. I have added one more setting in app settings.json, and this is the command that will be used to connect with Docker. Is simply the code that's needed to interact with the MCP server on Docker. This is setting up logging. Here we list the tools that are available in that service. There's a delay here of 100 milliseconds, and this is so that we do not work with the MCP server until it's fully initialized. This is where we're connecting with the model on GitHub. Here we start the chat, and then we loop through a while loop where we read the user's prompt, we process it, respond to it, and start all over again. So now we can test this out and see if it works. Back in a terminal window inside of the client app, I can simply do .NET run. You can see here that I was able to read all the services that are available inside of this JSON file. And this is due to this command here where I'm displaying all the available tools. Going back, I can enter a prompt. So I'm going to ask list students studying nursing. And there you go, we get the students in the School of Nursing. This concludes the journey whereby we built an MCP server, deployed it to Docker Hub, and then created a .NET application that consumed the MCP server. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and until I see you again in the next video, take care.